Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. Now fall is kicking in here and I wanted to create some fall and Halloween cards today. However, I wanted to dip into some supplies that aren't conventionally Halloween or fall themed and show you how to use them to create really beautiful fall cards. This will hopefully help you to take supplies that you have in your craft room and turn them to different seasons by just changing up colors and themes to get really beautiful card making projects. Everything I use in today's video is listed and linked down below, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Now without further ado, let's get into it. So for this first card, I'm going to use one of my Simon Hurley Create layering stencils. This one is called Pretty Petals, and it was released during the summer because the florals have a little bit of a summer feeling to them. But today, we're making a fall card using these. So I'm going to do some stenciling in my stamp wheel to make it easier. I'll lift off the lid and set it to the side. And then we can take our piece of Simon Hurley Stark White cardstock and just place it right down onto that sticky mat to hold it in place nicely. Then I'll bring in my layering stencil set. This one has 3 different layers inside of here, and each piece to the layering stencil has the name and number etched in so that it's really easy to tell which way that these go. Now when you're using Simon Hurley stencils in your stamp wheel, there's a certain way that you have to apply them down. These have a coating on the back side of them, and the matte side is the side that has the coating to them. There's also a glossy side in the stencil. When you're using Simon Hurley stencils, you want to place the glossy side down towards the sticky mat. The glossy side is going to help it stick a little bit better and also not peel off the coating that's on the matte side. And then I can stick this right down onto my sticky mat. And you'll just want to place it into the sticky mat with your fingers to make sure it's nice and held down while we do our stenciling. Now the color palette that I'm using for today's card was super inspired by my friend Mindy Egan. She creates beautiful cards, and recently she shared this card on her social media, and I absolutely fell in love with this fall color combination that she used to create these gorgeous florals. I'll leave a link down below to her YouTube channel as well, so you can get inspired after you're done watching this video. She has some amazing card making tutorials on there. Alright, so I'm going to start off with my first color, which is Slippery and Wet, and I'm using these ink stands to hold it in place so that I can really easily just ink it up, and it's kind of a one-handed job. My ink pad isn't moving all the way around. And then I'll bring this right onto my surface and start blending it out. And I'm just using these little detail Altenew blending brushes, and this is super helpful because they're nice and small, so I'm able to get into like one of the flowers at a time and not have to worry about over blending into other ones or using a bunch of tape to mask it off. So this makes the process really super helpful. It's a lot quicker than having to mask off lots of different flowers, and you get tons of control since the blending tool is nice and small. Next, I'm going to bring in a little bit of traffic cone. I can place this right into my ink stand. And then when it comes to these little blending tools, I get lots of questions on whether I clean them out each time, but instead I have one for each color family. So next I'm going to go into the orange color family blending brush. And I store them in this little lipstick organizer. I'll link down below to this as well because it's super helpful for storage. So then I'll go in and ink this up, go in with a small blending tool again, and I'm just picking and choosing which flowers I'm going to blend in with these different colors. So with orange, I'm just going to pick and choose a couple flowers all the way across to blend in with this beautiful orange tone. And these are such great fall colors. I chose them because they're a little bit more muted than my usual like super bright tones, which gears them really nicely towards that fall color palette. And then Mindy used some pink too, so I'm going in using Rosy Cheeks. And again, this is a more muted tone because usually I would go in using something like Prom Queen or something, which is super bright. You can see this one is a little bit more of a softer color, which I really like. And just blend this in and fill in the last couple of spots. And like I said, these blending tools, you can see like there's pretty much no overlap between the colors. You get tons of control with it and are able to stay in these small sections. Now staying on the first layer, I'm going to bring in some shading. So for the yellow, I'm going to use a little bit of Guppy and blend in some orange. And you just want to start in at kind of one side and sort of blend a little bit of color onto the image there. And this just adds lots of depth and dimension. And I know we're still only on the first layer here, but bringing in several tones to just one layer really gives tons of depth and dimension to a blended image. So just bring it in from the edges, and I feel like this really brings it to life nicely. For traffic cone, I'm going to bring in a little bit of red bee sting, going with my red blending tool. I'm just going to tap this off a little bit off to the side to just make sure it's not too strong before we start blending it right onto the surface. And just bring it in on that orange color to add a little bit of depth and shading to it. All right, and then lastly for the pink, I'm going to add a little bit of darker pink, which is this Prom Queen color. And again, bring it in on one side to add some shading. And this is a really cool way to be inspired by someone. So like I said, Mindy's card, I'm pretty much following the color scheme to a T, but then I'm using different products to kind of switch it up a little bit. And it's a great way to kind of get ideas if you're feeling a little bit uninspired, to sort of be inspired by people's color palettes and bring it to life in your own way. Then we can cap off the ink pad and lift off this first stencil to reveal that first layer of florals. That is gorgeous. Now going in with the second layer, again, you want to flip it so that the glossy side is facing downwards, and it should all still line up because we're using them all backwards like this. So I'll lay this right over top and then place your fingers down into the sticky mat to make sure that it sticks in place. Now for this layer, I'm gonna use kind of the darker colors to blend over top. So going in over top of the yellow flowers, I'm gonna use a little bit of Roar for this layer to really just add some nice depth and shading and bring in a darker second layer to that color. So we can easily just shade them right in. And then for the orange and pink layers, I'm gonna go in using a little bit of Bee Sting, which is that nice red color, and just blend it over top. And then we'll lift off this second layer to reveal that beautiful second layer, which adds lots of shading to these florals. Now I'm going in with the third layer here. Again, we want to flip it over so the matte side is facing upwards. And then you just want to kind of move it around until it lines up. That looks perfect. So I'll lay it down and then I'll place this right into the sticky stencil mat to hold it into place. Now this is what I thought was so beautiful about Mindy's color combination. For the leaves, she went in with a neutral, like a brown color, to really bring in those fall vibes. So here I'm gonna go in using Glimmer, which is this kind of mid-tone brown color. And then I'm gonna go in with a foam applicator and just sort of blend this color all throughout. Now I'm not going super heavy-handed right now, just kind of lightly blending this color all over the leaves to fill them all in with color. And then again, on this same layer, we can go in and add depth and dimension using a darker color ink pad, and I'm gonna use that smaller blending brush for more control. So here I'm going in using a little bit of a Weeping Willow, and to add the depth and dimension, we wanna add it into one side of the leaves here to make them a bit darker. So I'm starting in the center of wherever a floral would be, and I'm just going to blend that darker color into the leaves to just bring in lots of depth and dimension. Rather than just having them be a flat one color, this really brings them to life and makes them look almost 3D. Once that blending is complete, we can lift this stencil off and check that out. I love those brown leaves. It really gives a beautiful fall vibe to this card. And mine is still maybe even a little bit too bright for fall cards. It's definitely brighter than Mindy's example was, but I still love how it turned out in the end. It's absolutely gorgeous. Using those a little bit more muted colors and also the brown for the leaves really gives it that fall vibe. All right, then I'll just gently peel this cardstock out of that sticky mat. And then to clean it off, I'm just gonna go in using a bit of water. And then you can go in with a paper towel or a lint-free cloth and just really easily wipe off that sticky mat. And my inks clean up really beautifully with water and they don't stain, which is something that I really love about them. And then once the water evaporates off that surface, it's nice and sticky and ready to use again. Now to bring in even more of a fall/mixed media vibe to this card, I'm gonna go back in using Weeping Willow, which is that beautiful dark brown color, and I'm just going to smoosh it down over an acrylic block. This is going to create sort of a palette of color that we can lift from. Then I'll go in and just spray down a little bit of water over top of that ink. Then grab a paintbrush and we're just going to kind of gently flick this off the side to get a splatter onto our card. So we can just splatter this ink all over our card. You get some nice fine flicks and then some larger droplets as well all over. Now this is why I don't do mixed media. I can't tell if I like it or hate it. All right, here's what it looks like once they're dry. I like how it looks, but I'm not a huge fan of all these big droplets. So if I were to do it again, I would probably use a little bit less water and I would probably flick it from my finger like this, rather than using an acrylic block. I feel like I got too much water and color on it, and that's what created those big droplets. I'm torn though, because I do kind of like it. It sort of adds to that fall vibe to it. I want to hear down in the comments below, do you guys like this splatter or would you go without it? Now to tie this whole card together, I want a colored card base. So I've done a top folding stark white card and I want to match it to the color I've been using. So I'm gonna go in using a little bit of brown Weeping Willow ink on one of my foam blending tools, and we'll just go right in all around the edge and blend this color on super easily. This is super simple to do, and these foam blenders add tons of color right away. And I also love this because it matches the color of the project that I've been creating really easily. So you don't have to have tons of colors of cardstock on hand, which is really helpful. And I also love that you don't have to blend the whole inside piece, you just have to blend the edges to get a nice border of color. Now to adhere this together and make sure that it stays nice and stuck, I'm using the new My Sweet Petunia glue press. I've really been liking this. I'm probably gonna share a full video soon, but it makes squeezing and adding glue to your project super easy with this nice fine nozzle and the glue press, and then you can just place it right in its stand when you're not using it, which is airtight. So I've been really enjoying that. For adding glue down in kind of a no fuss way, you can make sure this is nice and centered, and we get a couple of seconds to like move it around if need be, which I've been really liking with liquid glue too. For the sentiment, I'm using the Must Have Sentiments foil plate and die set. And what I love so much about this set is that it takes one pass to go through to foil it, and it takes one pass to go through to die cut it. So with each pass, you get 6 really beautifully foiled sentiments in such a gorgeous font. And so I tend to do them a lot at one time, and I keep them in this little bin from scrapwood.com. I've been really loving these because they're stackable, so you can store, several different die cuts in each one and keep them on your desk for when you're ready to use them. And I think this Thinking of You sentiment is going to be perfect for the front of this card. The color scheme of the card is perfect for fall, but for the sentiment, I want to make it a little bit more versatile, so I think this is going to be perfect. So I'll just pop this up on a little bit of foam tape, and then we'll place it right front and center on our card. And that sentiment finishes it off perfectly, and I love the little bit of shine that it adds to the card. Here's a close look at that finished card. I love that we're able to use the pretty petal stencil, which is usually this really bright and summery themed stencil, and turn it into more of a fall design to match the theme of the season. It's all about changing up the colors in the design to match whatever vibe or season you want it to, and this really brings a lot of versatility to your card making supplies. Now I have this pretty petal stencil that we inked up and I never washed off. And I want to show you a fun technique that you can use to get the reverse imprint of the stencil. So I'm going to go in and just spray this down with water to get those inks moving on the surface. Once those are kind of mixing and blending a bit, I'm going to go in with my piece of stark white cardstock. We'll flip over the stencil, and then we'll place it right down onto the front of our card. Now to get a nice print, I'm going to place on a piece of paper towel and then start giving pressure. And the thing about the paper towel is by placing it down here, it's going to catch any of the excess ink that goes outside of that stencil and still give us a really beautiful imprint. If you didn't have the paper towel down, it would be kind of a mushy mess with the ink going everywhere. So once we've given a little bit of time to set in place, we can then lift that off, and then we'll lift the stencil off the surface of our card, and we get this really beautiful print. It's of course more pastel because the colors were really watered down, but I love how it looks to giving us that beautiful watercolor impression. All right, now you can take this even a step further if you want to as well. So we printed the excess ink down, and that was on the matte side of the stencil. So it matches up just like this. And if you want to, you can keep going in with the rest of the layering stencils. So again, we're gonna go in with the matte side facing downwards now, and this will easily line up your design and the stencils. So just find out exactly where it goes in there. And then once it's perfectly lined up, we can use some tape to adhere it into place. And I'm using some mint tape to hold it down, and this new mint tape dispenser makes it really helpful to get it out with just one hand if you need to, and tape everything down. So for this, I'll go in using a bit of Weeping Willow, and I'm gonna use my domed foam blending tool again. And when I'm doing this, I want this to be a lot lighter of a brown color, almost kind of a pastel now since the inks are so soft on here. So I'm tapping it off on my craft sheet to the side before I go onto the surface, and keep a really light hand and just blend all the way around. And again, keeping this much lighter than usual because the colors underneath are so much lighter as well. And if you want, you can even add a slight bit dimension to this too by just bringing the color in darker in some areas to give it a little bit of depth here as well. And again, I just love this idea of adding brown as the neutral because it works with almost any color palette as well. Then we'll lift off my stencil. You can see those leaves beautifully fill in that design really nicely. And then last but not least, we'll go in with this last layer, again, matte side facing downwards so we can line this up perfectly. Really, whatever side of the stencil you have facing down at first, you want to keep that repeating as you're doing the rest of the stenciling to make sure everything lines up perfectly. Now to finish this off, I want to add a little bit of dimension to the card and some shine as well. So I'm going in using some overheated solar paste, and the thing that's really cool about solar paste is it'll work perfectly with this card since it gives more of a subtle shine than a lunar paste would. So I'm just going to add this right down onto the surface. You want to add quite a bit at the top of the design because we can always scrape any of the excess back into the jar once we're done. Once we've added a good amount of top, we can then go in using the scraper tool from that same paste tool set, and this is going to help us scrape and even out the paste across the surface. So I'll just scrape it down, and we'll do this several times until it covers the whole design. There's still lots of paste down in here, so if you need to cover the rest, just kind of tilt it downwards like this, and it'll apply more paste onto that design. And then once it's all the way across the surface, we can scrape at more of an upward angle to smooth it out and collect any of the excess paste that's on the surface. This scraper tool is game-changing for getting smooth and even results. Then we can take any of the excess on our palette knife and scrape it right back into the jar so there's no waste. Once we're done, we can lift this right off the surface and you get a beautiful, smooth, and even coverage. And once we're done using the paste, you just want to spray everything down with water and clean off the stencil right away. They're really easy to clean off the stencils with water right when you're done using them before anything dries onto the surface. And once this is all dry, it looks stunning. Now the really cool part about solar paste is that it's white, so it really sort of just blends into the surface of this card and just gives a little bit of texture. But when you tilt it in the light, you get to see all of that gorgeous orange shine. So it's perfect for applications like this, where you don't want it to take over the card, you want it to be a little subtle until you see that nice, beautiful surprise shine on the surface. So here's a closer look at what that shine looks like in person. It is so stunning on that white cardstock. I love it. All right, then again, to finish this card off really simply, I'm going back in with this glue press and just easily adding liquid glue all over the back. Then I'll line this up onto my card base and place it down to adhere it nicely into place. And that looks perfect. And for this one, I'm using those same sentiments. I've been running low, so I might need to do some more foiling soon. And here I'm using the Just a Note sentiment, and I'm gonna place it kind of a little bit more upwards and towards the center of the card. And again, it just adds the perfect amount of shine, and Just a Note is such a great sentiment because it can be used for any occasion. I love how this card turned out with that nice subtle shine, and that we were able to get a 2-for-1 with that last background to create this new watercolor background and do some more layered stenciling on it. Such a cool technique and a great way to get even more use out of your supplies. Moving into the next card, I'm going to share another stenciling technique using this gorgeous Dazzling diamond stencil. Now again, this is a 3-piece layering stencil, and this one was released during the Christmas season, so last year you saw it in a bunch of reds and greens and gold colors, but I'm going to show you how to turn it into a Halloween background. And then again, I'll bring in the stamp wheel, lift off the lid, and place down a piece of stark white cardstock right in the center. Again, they're etched with a number and the initials of the stencil. We want to flip it over so the glossy side is facing downwards. And then we can line this right up with our card project super easily and place it right down. You want to just stick this down with your fingers and it'll stick really nicely on that sticky mat. And for this one, I'm going to go in with some Halloween colors. So I'm starting off with this beautiful color called Crown Me. And I'm going to use these large Altenew blending brushes. These cover a lot more surface area than those small ones. So when I'm doing a full background in one color, this is what I like to use because it's a huge time saver to cover the whole surface area really quickly. And I also like blending brushes for designs like this because this design has a bunch of little corners and edges, and sometimes foam tools kind of skip out on those and give you a little bit of a hazy look, whereas all of the little bristles in here get into all of those details and give me a really nice, sharp, blended impression. All right, so once I got that all blended out with color, we'll lift that off the surface. And that's a great first layer of color. Next, I'm going in with this layer with small diamonds. I'm going to flip it over so the glossy side is facing down, and we'll just line this up where it belongs in our design. It fits perfectly right in there, and that's when you know it's lined up, and you can place it right down into the sticky mat. All right, here I'm gonna use a little bit of orange, so I'm going in with this bright orange guppy color. Again, using a nice large blending brush. I have one of these for each color family as well, so that I don't have to clean them off in between colors, and it makes it really easy to switch it up. And again, super quick to cover this whole background with color. You can lift it right off the surface and it's starting to fill in that design beautifully. Last but certainly not least, we're going in with this large diamond stencil. Again, flip it over and you're going to line this right up in the center of those little lines. Once you got it perfectly centered, adhere it down into place. And for this one, I'm gonna bring in Lunar Paste in the color Psych. This is a really bright lime green color, and it's gonna go perfectly with the orange and the purple. So I'll go in with my palette knife from the paste tool set, lift out some paste, and again, glob lots of it right at the top of the stencil. And you're gonna really get a good idea for what the difference between Lunar and Solar Paste is, because Lunar Paste here is much more opaque and filled with color and shine. It's gonna make a really bold impact on the card. Then I'll go in with the scraper tool from that same paste tool set, and I'll just scrape this really evenly nice down the design. And then again, you just wanna keep going until it's nice and covered, kind of at this downward angle to cover it with paste. And once everything on that stencil is evenly coated, we can then go at kind of this upward angle to collect any of the excess paste and gently swipe across the surface. Then we'll take our palette knife, scrape any of the excess right off, and put it all right back into the jar so we can use it for next time. All right, then we'll lift this stencil off the background, and I love how that looks. So we'll peel this off and set it to the side to dry. All right, same thing applies to this mat. You just want to clean it off with lots of water and a paper towel before anything dries on that surface. To keep this mat nice and sticky, you don't want to let Lunar Paste dry on it, so just clean it off before you're done working. And the awesome part about Lunar Paste is it is heat stable as long as you keep the heat tool moving around the surface. I love this Ranger heat tool because it's quiet and it's also not as much of a concentrated heat, so it heats it more evenly across the surface. This helps speed up the drying process, so if you're impatient like me, this will be super helpful. And here's what that looks like once it's nice and dry. It's absolutely stunning. And you can see how that Psych Lunar Paste really makes such a bold impact on the card with all of that color and gorgeous shine that it adds. For a focal point image, I'm going into this Purrfect Cats stamp set, and I love this little black cat. I made him so that he'd be perfect for Halloween cards. All right, so I'm gonna go in using a little bit of VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and this is gonna give me a nice jet black, crisp image, and I'll stamp him right down onto my stark white cardstock. Perfect. I love his little facial expression and that there's no coloring involved, so it makes it super simple. Since it's a pigment ink, to set this guy into place, I'm gonna throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder and heat set this until it's nice and shiny. All right, to cut out this little guy, I'm gonna go into the Purrfect Cats coordinating die set from Spellbinders, and I'm just going to find the image that I need. Then I can just center the die with a nice even white border all the way around the image and tape it down to hold it in place. And I'm also gonna use a little circle die to die cut out of a piece of stark white cardstock to act as kind of a grounding place for this cat. All right, then I'll place both of these in the die cutting machine and run it right through. And you guys know what this calls for, a little bit of awkward die cutting. That sure is awkward. I've been keeping you guys on your toes because sometimes I include some awkward die cutting and sometimes I don't. You never know. All right, and this perfectly cut out that circle, and then we can pop out that little cat too. And you've got it cut out with a really nice white border all the way around the image. And to make this little guy pop off of that white circle a little bit more, I'm gonna go in using some Guppy ink, which is this nice light and bright orange color, which we also use this in the background, so it'll kind of tie everything together. And I'm just going to lightly blend a little bit of this orange right in the center to almost look like a little moon or a little nighttime sky, and it'll just help this stand really nicely off of that background. Then we'll pop up this little cat right on top of that orange background. Then for the sentiment, I'm going in with the Fall Sampler stamp set, and I'm gonna use the Happy Halloween stamp. And here I'm gonna do some embossing, so I'll use my anti-static powder tool to make sure no powder sticks where we don't want it. And then I'll ink up the sentiment with my clear, sticky Versamark ink pad, and stamp it right down onto the cardstock. And then again, we can throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder, tap off any of the excess, and heat it till it's nice and shiny. Okay, then to make the sentiment show up, I'm gonna go in using the Crown Me ink again, and this is going to make the sentiment strip match my background perfectly. So I'll just blend this color over top of the sentiment, and you can see that embossing is going to resist any of the color that goes on top. And then you can also go in with a little cloth and just buff it off to make sure that sentiment stays nice and white and remove any of the excess ink from it. Then to finish off the sentiment, I'm gonna go in with my Spring Assist scissors and fussy cut these out. I really like to go in and take an extra second to fussy cut sentiments out, just because I feel like it gives it a lot more of a finished effect rather than just leaving it on a larger rectangle of cardstock. And also, then it allows you to see more of the rest of the design and not cover so much of your card up. I really like these Fiskars Spring Assist scissors because they spring back out at you, so your hands won't get tired as you're cutting, and it makes fussy cutting out these sentiments really super easy. And we can also pop up the sentiment kind of right below it, hanging off the edge of that circle. Then I've added some foam tape on the back, and I'll pop this right up on the center of my card. And here is a look at that finished card. I absolutely love how this Halloween background turned out by using that stencil and just changing up the colors to make it work for Halloween. And adding that little black cat from the Purrfect Cat stamp set was such a fun touch to finish everything off beautifully. Thank you so much for joining me today as we created these fall and Halloween cards. I hope you really enjoyed it. Leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite. And also down there is a full supplies list to everything that I used. And using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. I hope to see you again very soon for another card making and crafting video. Have a great day. Bye.